Welcome to Stigma Shakers podcast. I am your host, Ali Hensley, author, speaker, and stigma shaker of the best kind. This podcast is all about shaking and breaking up taboo into digestible chunks, which we like to call our social smoothie. In this podcast, I will ask the difficult questions that can be hard to digest because everyone deserves a little balance in their mental health diet. And let's face it, folks, the only thing normal in this world is different. So my question to you, can we make truth the next biggest trend? Lissie Harper began a campaign after her husband, who she had married just 4 weeks earlier, was killed on duty in Berkshire in August 2019. 3 people were convicted of manslaughter but cleared of murder. Lissie used her profound grief and determination for justice and campaigned for legal changes named Harpers Law. With the support of the UK government and Police Federation, Harpers Law was passed, which legislates the extension of mandatory life sentences to anyone who commits the manslaughter of an emergency worker and unlawful killing of those on duty. In recognition of her efforts in introducing Harpers Law, Lissie has been awarded an MBE in the King's New Year's Honours list. Now Lissie is moving forward with her life away from the public profile as a formidable campaigner. And notably, Lissie is an inspirational role model for anyone on how pain can be repurposed. Today I am joined by a very special friend of mine, a remarkable woman, and someone I think that you'll gain a lot of hope and comfort from as we talk about the very difficult, stigmatized topic of grief. And we, of course, know that there are many types of grief out there, but this particular story has literally hit the headlines over the last few years. But I've had the pleasure of getting to know Lissie incredibly over the last while. And I think that her story is definitely one to listen to and hear and tell. So Lissie, thank you so much for joining us today on Stigma Shakers podcast. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm good. Yeah, I'm excited to kind of just chat to you and talk about, all the things that people find so uncomfortable talking about, because, it's real and raw and that's what we should be kind of discussing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Get those conversations out there to make everything just a little bit more comfortable for both sides of the coin, I think. So I would like to sort of dive deep into the conversation off the bat, if we may. You married your childhood sweetheart, Andrew. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So we went to school together and college and just kind of grew as a couple and sort of grew up together, I suppose. And then, we'd been together for 12 years when we got married. So it was kind of a long time coming, but it was a lovely day, and it would have been our 4-year wedding anniversary a couple of days ago. So that's kind of was a big milestone.
I saw that on Instagram, and as you have just said that, for some reason I've just had like goosebumps go from head to toe. So you got married, and then something incredibly tragic happened. Can you walk us through that day?
Yeah, so 4 weeks after the wedding, it was just kind of a normal sort of day, I suppose. Andrew, obviously was a police officer and he worked shifts. He went off to work as normal. And I spoke to him on the phone, actually. I think it was something about my business. And I was looking to get a website made, and you've sort of come into that further down the line, obviously. And so we were talking about that, and he was kind of almost not giving me the green light because obviously I didn't need it, but he was so supportive, and so it was such a kind of pivotal conversation in a way, with him sort of going, oh, just go for it. You can do it. And this is something you've always wanted to do. So just go for it. Which was really lovely. Something I can kind of look back on now. And it wasn't until a little while after he had died that I kind of relived that a little bit. But then, he had to go. He had to sort of go off back to work. And so I said goodbye, and it was kind of like, oh, I'm not sure what time I'm going to finish, not sure how late it's going to be. So, of course, I went to bed. And then I think it was sometime in the very early hours, I got that sort of knock on the door, very confused, as to who it was, because obviously, he would have a key and just let himself in. And the next thing I know, I'm sort of greeted by this police officer at the door, giving me the worst news I could ever sort of have. So yeah, that was kind of the first moment of like utter shock. Just not the thing that you ever expect to hear. It happens to other people, but you never think it's going to happen to you, that kind of cliche. It's just kind of, from there, it was, wow, like everything is going to change.
When you heard the knock at the door, did your mind go to, this is going to be devastating? Or do you think that because Andrew had been in the force for a while, and obviously it was his choice to be a policeman, wonderful. And my dad's was a policeman for 30 years. He's retired, and we've obviously spoken a lot about that. But was this ever sort of like a reoccurring fear of yours that knock would one day come? Or is that something you sort of resigned yourself? And we got married, we got our life ahead of us.
Yeah, I mean, no, actually, I never thought that sort of thing. I think you become so comfortable in yourself and your life, and you just don't think, thankfully, it doesn't happen kind of that often. It does, but it is still quite unlikely. And yeah, I would say sort of, be safe. And we talked about other areas in the police that he could have gone into, like firearms and things like that. And I remember having conversations about, oh, isn't that, going to be more dangerous? And, obviously he had joined a new team, and he was doing different things, but it was a fairly normal sort of job that he went, he'd been to that sort of thing before. So actually, no, I really didn't. It just became normal. He'd be out in the middle of the night doing his job.
And we can't live in traumas that haven't happened yet. We can't live in the future maybes or what ifs, because we just wouldn't live that way. We would be terrified of life constantly. So the police knocked at the door and they told you that Andrew had been killed on duty. How much information did they share with you at that point? Or was information even irrelevant at that point when you were just faced with such shock?
There wasn't a huge amount of information. It's funny, actually, because I look back on it and I think, how did I not know? You see in kind of the movies and stuff when, there's a policeman at the door, or, if someone's in the military or whatever. That's kind of supposed to be a sign, isn't it? Like something bad's happened. But I just didn't think that. I welcomed this, gentleman into my house in the middle of the night, and it just wasn't my first thought. So, which is why I was so shocked. And he kind of sat me down and, he said 3 words to me that have never felt so alien. And that was, Andrew has died. And that was, God, what? I didn't understand. I couldn't get my head around it. And he was, he was really lovely. And he was really consoling, and I just didn't get it. So I think, yeah, he said that to me, and then it was a little while later, he said something like, oh, and 10 people have been taken into custody or something. And I was like, what do you mean? I was so sure it was an accident, and he'd been driving home or something. It didn't occur to me that actually there was more to it than that. yeah, that was just kind of the start of this very surreal sort of time for me where I was just in total shock.
Total numbness. And they talk about, obviously,
Yeah.
the 5 stages of grief.
Yeah.
So much we know about the 5 stages of grief, but theory versus living are 2 very different ways to approach. And obviously, as you know, your beautiful bio says that you went on to campaign, but following that was obviously the court case that had been made very public, and you were grieving and living in the public eye at that point. How were you behind closed doors?
I remember the first couple of weeks, I was at my parents' house and I was just a mess. You know, I didn't have my phone with me. I didn't want it. I didn't watch TV. Didn't listen to the radio. I was so closed off from everything that I didn't really know what was going on. You know, thankfully I had this amazing support network in my family, and they just kind of cocooned me, I suppose, and protected me from everything that was going on, because I didn't want to know. Actually, at that point, I didn't care. You know, the worst thing had happened. Any of the details was totally irrelevant to me for a good couple of weeks. And then it wasn't till, you know, I started to kind of emerge from that initial shock that I kind of craved a little bit more information. And I spoke to some of the people who were, you know, in charge of the case, and I kind of slowly started to get little sort of being drip fed little bits of information. And I think that it slowly started to build my, like, not anger, well, yeah, anger, I suppose, partly, but also just kind of determination to make sure that what was happening was, you know, right. And, you know, then I started to go to, you know, the court and everything. And I think you do, like, at first you think, yeah, I don't want to know any of the details. It doesn't matter to me, but it does matter, and it will matter further down the line. So I think it's important actually to be involved in that. Obviously some people are going to find that they can't do that, and that's fine. But I think if you do, then you need to speak up and sort of have an involvement.
They do say, Brené Brown, in fact, says that one of the stages of grief, I even love Brené, is reasoning, how we need to find a reason in such trauma and adversity. And I would say that it must have been quite a whirlwind. You must have been, I'm surmising, this might be incorrect, please tell me, but caught up in this whirlwind of the court case, of justice or injustice, as we saw, or I believe, and I think a lot of the public would believe that. How did you process the verdict? And tell us about that verdict.
I mean, first of all, the court cases were kind of right around the sort of COVID time. So, you know, there was a first court case that began and had to be cancelled. So that was a bit of a blow. So you kind of build yourself up to get to this point, and then it's all pushed back. We then started the case number 2. And I followed that a lot more closely. And I was so sure, actually, that it was going to be a guilty verdict.
I think everybody
really was. I think we all were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So sitting there in the court, and you know, the jury were there, and you know, you kind of you watch them, that you kind of you monitor them, and you see their habits and how interested they seem and how, you know, switched on they seem, I suppose. And you think, no, these people are going to make the right decision. So for somebody to stand up and come back with a not guilty of murder verdict was, I mean, I was just mind blown. Sitting in my seat, that was the initial first feeling of, no, this isn't right. And something needs to be done about it. So that was kind of like a smack me in the face moment, what the hell is going on?
Well, anger,
Yeah.
anger can be a really productive emotion. A lot of people would say, obviously, anger is a negative emotion, but I think in the context of maybe feeling anger can make us feel stronger in a certain way and more like I have to do something with this anger and this purpose. And I think that's obviously what you did when the verdict was delivered and you then campaigned for Harper's Law. And Lissie had an amazing documentary with Sir Trevor McDonald, which was on ITV, and I encourage people to go and watch that for the finer details of this case and of the tragedy that happened. You were fueled to change the law with this grief. What is that law? Just for people who might not necessarily know Harper's Law.
So Harper's Law has basically been designed so that anybody who's found guilty of causing the death of an emergency services worker, frontline worker, will receive a certain sentence, in prison. And, a lot of people along the way sort of said, oh, yeah, but why don't you look at sentencing guidelines and things like that? And that was part of the problem that, the judges, they're not given enough leeway to sort of, give these higher sentences. So a lot of the time, especially in Andrew's situation, they'll get a meager amount of years, which then ends up being a lot lower than what they've been sentenced anyway. Which is just, so wrong. But yeah, basically Harper's Law is gonna change that.
The process of grief publicly, and not everybody is going to be obviously grieving publicly. Did that delay the grieving process for you, or were you walking side by side with it in terms of processing what happened?
I think at first, it all being in the public eye was so overwhelming. It was everywhere, literally everywhere. And I didn't want to look at any of the papers, or I couldn't even go on my phone without seeing it. And of course, because our wedding wasn't that long before, our wedding pictures were just plastered across the internet. So it was. Yeah, it was a lot. It was hard. I don't think it helped at all. The only thing it did help with, of course, was my campaign. And I had so much support. So I've got to look at that in a positive way as well, because it allowed all of these people to kind of reach me, and for me to reach them. And I don't know if I could have done it without that sort of level of support. So yeah, I suppose it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's, you need that privacy. You need that kind of space to be able to grieve properly, which, even now, I don't even know if I've kind of had fully.
You said grieve properly. Is that something that is sort of like maybe a societal expectation? What is grieving properly? What is the best practice way to grieve? Or to debunk the fact that there isn't a proper way at all?
There's absolutely not a proper way to grieve, I don't think. There's no guidebook. There's no right and wrong way. And I think a lot of people, especially in the media and in sort of articles and things, they say about, the 5 stages of grief and whatever, any stages. And yeah, I suppose there are stages of grief if you want to put it like that, but they're definitely not in an order. And you might experience anger at the beginning, and then it might go, and then it might come back. And I think we're so, set on oh, am I doing this right? Is this wrong? Should I be feeling this way? Should I be doing this? Which I've experienced as well. But it's just not true. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to do the right thing and be the right way. And, what about this person? They're supposed to be grieving, but they're doing amazingly. And it's just not real.
Grief comparison.
You can't put that sort of pressure on yourself.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say again about, am I doing it the right way? I mean, we're so, and we've talked about this over like coffee dates and and things. And we talked about how there is this expectation of almost like there's a politeness with the way that we approach difficulty. And something that we've discussed is how people approach your grief, I think, as well. And tell me a little bit about, and I always think that sometimes any misunderstanding is an opportunity for learning and empathizing. But tell me about things that frankly just have not been helpful to your process, where people are just not necessarily reacting or engaging the way that you'd really need them to.
Well, I think it seems to me, after speaking to a lot of people in a similar situation, it's very common to find yourself in, the worst possible time of your life, and you kind of have these expectations of, especially your friends, your closest friends, and even family, that they're going to support you, they're going to behave a certain way, whatever. And that just isn't always the case, sadly. I think people find it really hard sometimes to talk to you, to reach out, or even to be supportive. And I think it's sadly really common that we end up losing friends. I've lost various friends over the years for different reasons, but some of that is just about not feeling comfortable with talking to somebody like me who's grieving, which I think is a shame, because there is no right thing to say. There are wrong things to say, I suppose.
What are those wrong things? What's been the comments that you've had to go, really?
Well, there's always there's the common ones, isn't there? Like, oh, you'll find somebody, and in those early days, that's not what you want to hear. You'll be all right. Or, are you feeling better now? It's not an illness. That's not the right thing to say. And another thing, which isn't necessarily the same, but one thing that really gets to me is when people refer to for example, my late husband as an ex-husband, or, oh, your ex. That's not right. And we should not do that.
Just before we jumped on this call, I had this moment of, like, I don't actually know many people who have lost their husbands, because I think also our age group the sequence is sort of a little out in that way. And I thought, oh,
yeah,
late husband, I don't know, not former husband, your late husband, right? But as you said, it's really interesting when people put on the term ex. This was not a choice breakup. This wasn't a breakup.
Yeah.
This was a tragic ending.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, obviously we've got to be a little bit, kind of understanding, because it's not easy, and there aren't always the right words, and there aren't always a lot of words that people are given to kind of to use in this situation. And sometimes it is genuinely a mistake, but I think people can sympathize with you sometimes in relating, for example, divorce and grief. And that's very, very different. And obviously both trauma and have their own set of, difficulties, and are both shit, but very different. And yeah, so it's things like that, I think, that some people just don't, and just insensitivity, generally, just, I don't know. There are a lot of things that, especially at the beginning, you might be a bit more sensitive to. I mean, nowadays, you kind of heard it all, and you get used to it. But I think when people are really struggling in the early days, it's just important to be sensitive, not start sort of bitching about what your partner's doing or whatever. It's just about being there for them.
And I've had conversations with various people, and obviously yourself, about grief, and how, I mean, we sort of treat the grieving sort of like there's what's the word I'm looking for? We sort of stray away because it's unknown territory. And as you said, people don't know what to say, but it's almost better saying, like, I actually just don't know what to say. But at least it's acknowledging it. It's not kind of gaslighting your grief or minimizing your grief. or, you know, I think we do that with situations that we're so far distanced from of understanding that it's easier just to slope over here, give an apologetic, I'm so sorry for your loss, and we'll just move on and let the grieving person sit quietly and overcome it. And I think, as you say, and also there was I don't know if you have heard this or something similar. The first 6 months are obviously horrific, coming to terms with loss. Actually, probably the first 6 days, first 6 minutes, like immediate loss. But it can kind of go, there's a lot of rallying that happens early on, as you say, a lot of support. And then over time, that support drops off. And it's almost like the second stage is when that goes and like, oh, now I really am alone. Because everyone thinks you're better at that point. Does that sort of resonate with you in any way?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think we all think, or we're all told that, you know, the first year or so, or like you say, the first 6 months are the hardest. And that's actually not always true. You know, the second year, even the third, actually, I'd maybe say is probably the hardest. You know, those people have kind of filtered away, and obviously you've still got, you know, the people who are really there for you. And, you know, your kind of biggest support. But it's different. It's definitely different. And I think people are, because you look the same and you look like, you know, oh, they look like they're doing really well. So they must be. But it's not always the case, is it? I think we forget to ask how we're really doing. And I think they stop talking about, you know, the person you've lost as much. And the anniversaries are, you know, even more kind of brutal because that time is moving on without them. And you're having to move on as well. Move forward, whatever. But are you? You know, are you moving on, or are you kind of filling the space around the gap that's forever going to be there? I think that's probably more realistic. You know, and we can do all kinds of amazing things, and we can fill our time, and we can, you know, speaking from experience, we can do all of the stuff.
Busy.
We can say yes to everything, but yes, we can be busy, but busy isn't necessarily fixed. And I don't think we can expect to fix it. I think it's just something we have to endure and something we have to kind of learn to live with,
coexist with.
So yeah, I think that's another thing that people say a lot to you. It'll get easier, and it will get easier, but it won't disappear. It won't just sort of become fine.
We're so good at fine. We're so good at busy. You know, how are you feeling? I'm fine. How are you feeling? I'm busy.
Oh yeah.
You know, we've all sort of do that, sort of move away, but it's quite interesting how polite we can be. When I spoke to a friend today, she said, you know, moving on is really quite scary, in the sense of the expectation of, not even an expectation, your own expectation of, you know, being forever a widow. And especially when you're young and you're, you know, you have your life, I'm doing air quotes with my hand, your life in front of you. How have you approached the concept of moving on into another relationship? Are you in a relationship now?
So I am, actually. Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because I was thinking just before we came on here how, you know, like how Queen Victoria kind of, with her grief, she was all in black, and, you know, she was veiled in her grief, like literally. And I feel like that is the expectation sometimes, or it feels like it is, like we're expected to wear black for the rest of our lives and just kind of sit and mourn. And although, you know, inside there is a sense of that, it's not sustainable to expect a person, and it's not fair either to expect a person to be like that. So yeah, I've really struggled with that kind of realization that I have to find a new kind of version of my life, and And for me, that does involve another person. As human beings, we're kind of programmed to be with another person, and that's right. That's the right thing for us. And although some people, resign themselves to being alone forever, that's not the case for me.
Is there this element of, or have society put a guilt on there or a judgment on there that, I can't believe that someone who lost their husband in such a tragic way, or anybody who lost, that why wouldn't you go through to the next phase of that and go, I do have desires, I do have needs, and it's not a betrayal, and it's not damning the legacy of your late husband. But how have you reconciled that, in the sense of, do people know? Is this something that you have hidden deliberately, or is it something you just wish to hold private for now? What's that been like?
I think that there's always been that expectation, or it at least feels like there's an expectation to sort of be this figure, this kind of, the grieving widow, or, the wife, PC Harper's wife. I'm always referred to that in the media and things. And on one hand, I think, I've kind of shielded my private life because I've, not been given that choice a lot of the time, just to give myself space to, figure out who I am now, because I'm a very different person. I think you do become a different person when you go through something like this. You kind of grow out of the person that you were before because you have no choice. I've kind of decided in some ways to keep my private life private. And when I say private, I mean between my circle of close friends and family and people that I see all the time. But I think it's important to express that it's okay to live.
It is okay to live, and it is okay to have a desire. And it's, I think a lot of people would find themselves on the precipice of that kind of confusion, or again, like that kind of guilt, or say someone was listening today, and let's hope that lots of people are listening today, those who feel like they're ready to move on, but they're grappling with that process of, do I deserve this? What will people think? Is it right to feel terrified? Like, speak to those sort of feelings if you can.
It's normal to feel scared, and to wonder if you're doing the right thing, and definitely normal to wonder if you deserve it, which everyone does deserve to be happy. But it is a common feeling of, do I deserve to be happy again? Is it the right thing? Am I betraying the person that I love, who isn't here? And I think probably most of the people who sadly aren't with us would want their loved ones to find happiness again. But it's also important to know that, there's no guidebook. There's no like right or wrong time, whatever anyone else says. And, I'm part of various different kind of groups, and Widowed and Young and places like that. And there is like this common, like, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And when is the right sort of time frame? And there isn't one. Like, there just isn't one. And there's always going to be people who are like, oh, wow, you moved on fast, or oh, you're still alone, or whatever. Everyone's going to have these opinions, and that's all they are. They're opinions, which even myself have had to sort of come to terms with that. But if you feel ready, then that's all that matters.
I was going to say, you have to live with the reality for the rest of your life of what happened. But as you say, you don't need to be in mourning to not love Andrew. You'll always love Andrew. And even my mum said this morning, she's like, Andrew would want Lissie to be happy. And I'm like, he would. I know. And that's generally like it's not dishonoring. It's not dishonoring the people we love by being happy, smiling, hearing ourselves laugh, and being intimate again, emotionally intimate, physically intimate with another person. I don't know, what was that like? Sort of moving through your relationship going, I'm going to choose this person now.
It's definitely a journey. You do get to the point where you have to allow yourself that, and you have to kind of quieten the voices, and all of the noise externally, and say what is right for me now, and what would Andrew want. And I think if there are going to be people who have a problem with whatever you're doing, and have a problem with that, then how much can they genuinely care about you? Because if they don't want you to be happy, then I think that probably says more than anything else, doesn't it? Probably more about them.
That's their own judgment.
Yeah, and you can't listen to that. You just have to do what's best for you.
What was it like going on your first date with your new partner?
It was strange. It was very strange. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it, like I said before, it is learning to be this new version of yourself, and actually finding out who you are, who I am without Andrew, because I'd been with him forever. And, because we grew up together, we'd kind of sort of grown, I don't know, just kind of at the same speed. And I was half of a couple. And you have to almost learn to be the person that you want to be moving forward. And that's, definitely going to be an ongoing sort of journey for me. But it's a good one as well, because you get to, figure out like who you are and who you want to be with this new person. And that can be good too, because you can find this happiness as well. It's not going to be the same, and it's not going to be better or worse. It's just going to be different. And that's been really important for me to find that again.
I'm pleased that you were open to love again, and with this man that I hope is making you incredibly happy. Something that I think would be quite interesting to know is what he does for a living, or what area he is professionally, in contrast to maybe what Andrew did.
He is also in the emergency services. So, that's and I think that's partly just how it's happened. And, it probably is partly because people who are in that sort of a job are compassionate and thoughtful and caring, I suppose, which maybe that's something that I'm drawn to. Maybe that's something that I work well with.
Is there any fear there because of maybe the similarity?
A lot of people have asked me that, actually, or not asked me that, but some people have mentioned that to other people, and have been surprised. But no, I think, you could be in danger, or you could get hurt in any situation. You can't think like that, I don't think, because then you're in fear of living, and that's just not right. So no, actually, I can understand why people might think that, why would you put yourself through that sort of situation again? But, it's life. That's what it is. It's just living life. And that's what I'm doing. You could say that to people who are in these jobs, that, why would you want to put yourself in danger? But it's important. It's important work.
This has been a really lovely chat, Lissie. I really am grateful for your honesty today and your openness today. And I think that grief is something that still remains such an enigma. If you could give listeners a piece of advice about how we can better destigmatize and handle grief as the person going through it, and or the person around the person grieving, what would that be?
I think the problem we have kind of as a society is that we find it so uncomfortable talking about death, and with death comes grief. And I don't know why that is. Probably because we're scared about our own death, and people around us. But, it's probably the biggest part of life, and one of the most natural things, and it is hard to talk about, but it's important to talk about as well, because, you may not be going through it now, but somebody you love might be, and you might be one day. And so it might be uncomfortable, and if you've got a friend who's going through something like that, they don't care really what it is that you're saying, so much as just that you're there, and just that you're listening. I think that's probably the most powerful thing we can do. We can just listen. You don't have to say the right thing. You just have to be there for somebody who's going through probably the worst time in their lives. And to the people who are going through that, God, it's a hell of a thing. But it can make you stronger, which doesn't seem like, the biggest sort of thing to say, at the time when you're going through it. But the resilience that you will build will mean that you can get through anything. And you will find that you reach a point where you do find little bits of happiness again.
And you're absolutely right. Death is a very confronting, absolute, but natural part of life. And whilst we don't have to go around every day, I guess, thinking about our sort of immortality or mortality, I think it is interesting and almost helpful if we even did our own little self-inquiry around that word, mm-hmm. and how it sits with us before we then go into the world and share our opinions. Like, I think it's important just to do a little bit of self-inquiry, not all the time, because life should be joyful and happy, but mm-hmm. I think to have a bit of balance is everything. Here at the Stigma Shakers podcast, our aim is to shake up and blend unique social smoothies for our listeners to digest around the topics of stigma and taboos. Now that we're coming to the end of our discussion, Lissie, what ingredients would you want to have in your social smoothie to improve people's outlook, mental health and judgments in life?
I think just openness, kindness, compassion, obviously, and just truth, I think, is important.
Yes, truth. I love that. Does your smoothie have a name?
Oh, don't know. Don't know.
I was going to say the Truth Twister or the Truth Tutti Fruity or...
Yeah, Tropical Truth.
Perfect. Oh, this is going to be such a great menu for this season of the Stigma Shakers podcast. Lissie, if people do want to find you and reach out to you, how can they find you?
I am Lissie Harper on Instagram.
And Lissie has a really great business, by the way. She's an incredible artist, and your business is called The Print Bee. And I encourage everyone to go and check out Lissie's amazing flair and talent with art. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Lissie. That was obviously a very in-depth but important chat. And I'm really grateful for you putting your heart on your sleeve.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. It was lovely to talk to you, as always.
As always. Till next time. Thank you, everybody. I was going to do the Jerry Springer. Take care of yourselves and each other. But I won't. Just be nice to people. Just be kind.
Okay.